The banquet hall shimmered under the chandeliers, their crystals scattering golden light across 400 faces dressed in velvet and silk. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air, carrying that particular note of holiday cheer that comes only once a year. Then my dad's voice tore through it all, so loud it cracked across the room like a whip. He lifted his glass and his cheeks flushed crimson as he shouted for everyone to hear, "Dull college dropout, no future." His words sliced the air, and suddenly the music and chatter fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. I felt the heat creep up my neck as if a spotlight had burned me raw. Before I could even draw a breath, my sister leaned in with her perfect hair, framing a smile that cut sharper than any knife. "You will never be anything." The words slipped from her mouth like poison dressed as victory. I sat frozen, every muscle in my body telling me to rise to fight, to defend myself. Instead, I let the corners of my lips curl into a slow smile. Not forced, not bitter, just calm. My silence filled the space their mockery created. They thought I had surrendered, but inside I knew they had no idea what was about to come. My hands rested lightly on the linen tablecloth, fingers tracing the embroidery as if grounding myself in something solid. The guests shifted in their seats, some smirking, others whispering behind raised hands. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted past, but it could not disguise the sour taste that filled my mouth. Dad lowered his glass and grinned at the room as though he had told the joke of the evening. Jessica flicked her hair over her shoulder, enjoying the spotlight, convinced she had delivered the final blow. I had grown used to these moments. They had trained for them, it seemed, sharpening their words until they could cut me without lifting a hand. At family dinners back home in Lake Forest, the attacks had been quieter, whispered just loud enough for me to hear, hidden behind the clatter of silverware. Tonight was different. Tonight, Dad wanted an audience. The Drake Hotel ballroom was packed with business associates, neighbors, old friends, people who believed the Whitakers were a family to admire. He could not resist the stage. I looked around the room, meeting a few stares head-on. Some faces held pity, others curiosity. A handful looked almost thrilled to witness the humiliation. That was the cruel truth of gatherings. People loved a spectacle, and my family had always provided one. My mom fluttered nervously at Dad's side, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap. She whispered something to him, but he brushed her off with a wave, too pleased with himself to notice her discomfort. Inside me, a familiar ache stirred, but I refused to let it own me. I remembered being 17, standing in the kitchen when Jessica proudly announced her scholarship to Northwestern. Dad had lifted her in a spin, laughing as though she had won a crown. When I timidly shared that I wanted to study computer science, he muttered that it was a man's field, and perhaps I should look for something practical. That was the first time I felt invisible in my own home. I should have known then that invisibility would become my armor. Now, years later, in a ballroom bursting with laughter that had just been silenced by his insult, I wore that armor again. I touched my glass of water, letting the cool rim steady me, and smiled wider. I had learned the value of patience. Every humiliation they cast on me had been filed away like notes in a ledger. Tonight those debts were close to coming due. Guests began to whisper, shifting restlessly as if waiting for me to retaliate. One man leaned toward his wife and muttered that I should have stayed in school. A woman in emerald earrings whispered that such shame must be unbearable. Their words did not pierce me. They only confirmed that Dad had gotten what he wanted, the spectacle. But he miscalculated one thing. He believed my silence meant defeat. He did not understand that silence could also be power. The host of the evening, Graham Patel, was making his way toward the podium. His expression betrayed nothing, but I noticed the quick flicker of his eyes as they swept over me. He knew more than he let on. My chest tightened with anticipation. Soon the tide would turn, and when it did, I would not need to raise my voice. The truth would rise without my help. Jessica leaned closer, her perfume sweet and suffocating. Her whisper was meant for my ears alone, though I sensed others nearby heard it, too. "You will always be the shadow, Lena. I am the star." She pulled back her smile wide, her teeth gleaming beneath the chandelier. I let out a soft breath, steady and calm. She had been saying variations of that line since childhood. I had let her believe it then, but tonight was different. A waiter passed behind me carrying a tray of champagne, the glasses trembling against each other like a warning bell. I caught my reflection in the golden liquid, the same brown eyes I had seen in the mirror since childhood, but now they held something stronger, something steadier. I remembered nights hunched over a laptop in a cramped apartment, coding until dawn, chasing a dream no one believed in. I remembered rejection letters from investors, the sting of failure, and the surge of determination that followed. Those nights had taught me to endure silence, to let it sharpen rather than break me. Dad's booming voice pulled me back to the present. He launched into a story about Jessica's latest promotion at her marketing firm, embellishing it with grand gestures, each detail crafted to eclipse me further. Guests clapped politely, their attention redirected. He soaked it in, convinced the night had been won. My mom forced a smile, nodding dutifully, though her eyes darted toward me with guilt. I sat quietly listening, my smile unwavering. Beneath the noise, my thoughts whispered like a steady current. Let them believe. Let them laugh. Soon their voices would falter. Soon silence would belong to them. The air in the ballroom never fully returned to its easy hum after my dad's outburst, even as the band tried to fill the silence with a soft carol and waiters shuffled between tables with trays of pecan pie. The weight of what had been said hung over me like a storm cloud. People glanced at me and then quickly looked away. Some wore curiosity, others pity. A few a smug satisfaction that they had witnessed a scene they would retell at brunch tomorrow. My smile remained fixed, calm, and measured. Inside, I counted the beats of my heart, slowing them with each breath. I knew better than to answer their taunts. My silence was not a weakness. It was my armor. When Graham Patel, the host of the evening, stepped up to the podium, the crowd's attention shifted. His presence commanded respect. He was a man known in Chicago for his philanthropy, his voice warm and steady. He cleared his throat and adjusted the microphone, smiling at the audience. My dad leaned back in his chair, his chest swelling with pride, as though Graham's arrival was for him. Jessica's lips curved in the same self-satisfied smile, her hand smoothing the silk of her emerald dress. She glanced at me with a flash of triumph in her eyes. The host thanked everyone for attending, spoke about the importance of community giving, and hinted that a special acknowledgement would follow later in the evening. I caught that flicker in his expression again when his eyes brushed mine, and my stomach tightened. Patience, I reminded myself. The time was not yet. As the speeches paused and conversation returned, Dad filled the gap. He thrived on attention. He leaned toward the couple at the next table, launching into a story about Jessica's promotion. She had been promoted to senior account manager at a downtown firm, and he retold the news as though she had been crowned queen. The couple nodded politely, their eyes occasionally darting back to me. Dad's voice carried, as it always did, until others at neighboring tables heard as well. Soon half the ballroom knew Jessica had been recognized at her company. Dad basked in their admiration, using her light to throw a darker shadow over me. My mom sat quietly beside him, offering occasional smiles that did not reach her eyes. I knew she hated scenes like the one earlier, but she never truly stopped him. For as long as I could remember, she had played the role of mediator, smoothing rough edges without ever confronting the source. She believed survival meant avoiding conflict, even if that meant sacrificing me to his sharp tongue. I sipped my water, steadying myself when Jessica leaned close. Her voice was low but sharp enough to slice through the din. It must be hard, she said, watching someone your own age thrive while you struggle to find direction. I turned to look at her. Her blue eyes sparkled with cruel satisfaction. I kept my tone even. I am not struggling, Jessica. Her laugh tinkled like bells but was edged with disdain. You quit because you could not handle the pressure. That is all anyone here remembers. Her words pulled me back to a memory. We had been in college, both of us at Northwestern. I had been building a project, a healthcare app idea that had consumed months of coding and testing. I had shared it with her late one night, showing her the interface, proud of what I had built. A week later, she stood in front of her marketing class, presenting the exact concept as her own. I sat in the back, stunned, unable to speak. When I confronted her later, she shrugged. That is how the world works, she had said. Whoever tells it first owns it. I lost a scholarship because of that betrayal. My path shifted that day. Instead of clawing for scraps of recognition, I chose to leave, to take my ideas where they would be mine alone. The memories stung, but in the present I met her gaze without flinching. Some things never change, I said softly. She blinked, her smile faltering for just a moment before she turned away to soak in another round of congratulations from nearby guests. A middle-aged man in a burgundy jacket leaned toward me. So what do you do now after leaving school? He asked. His wife looked at me with polite interest. Her fork paused mid-air. My dad cut in before I could answer. She does nothing, he declared with a laugh. She drifts from one idea to the next, but nothing sticks. The man chuckled uncomfortably and nodded, taking Dad's word as truth. Heat prickled at my skin, but I did not speak. The question lingered, repeated in different forms as more guests circled. What are you doing these days? How do you fill your time? Always my dad. Answered always the same refrain about wasted years, bad choices drifting. Jessica chimed in with her version that I lacked discipline, that she had always carried the family's torch. Their voices grew louder, weaving a story of failure around me. Guests listened, some nodding, some whispering. I focused on the sound of my own breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I had heard worse from them alone at the dinner table, on car rides where the windows were shut tight and words echoed against glass. Tonight was just another chapter. The difference was that tonight they believed they had won, that they had crushed me before hundreds of witnesses. They had no idea the night still had more to reveal. I excused myself from the table for a moment and walked toward the tall windows at the edge of the ballroom. Outside, Michigan Avenue glittered with holiday lights, shoppers moving between stores bundled against the cold. For a moment, I pressed my hand against the cool glass and remembered walking down that street years earlier with my backpack heavy on my shoulders, broke, exhausted, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life by leaving school. The memory passed like a shadow, leaving behind only the steady certainty that every hard choice had led me here. When I returned to the table, Graham Patel was still at the podium, announcing raffle winners and thanking sponsors. My dad leaned toward Jessica, whispering with a grin. She covered her mouth as she laughed. I slid back into my seat, meeting Mom's eyes across the table, her lips pressed into a thin line, apology flickering there, but she said nothing. She never did. As the night pressed on, the pattern repeated. Guests asked, Dad answered, Jessica elaborated, and the story of my supposed failures grew larger. Their version of me painted a picture of someone lost, someone broken, someone who had never found her way. I let them build that illusion brick by brick. I stayed quiet, my smile steady, my silence intact. Yet even in the hum of humiliation, I felt a shift in the air. People were beginning to notice the cracks. A few guests glanced between Dad's booming voice and my calm face, their brows furrowed. Not everyone bought the performance. Not everyone believed that silence meant defeat. I held on to that. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee poured, the host tapped the microphone again. The crowd hushed, expectant. Dad straightened, Jessica smoothed her dress, both convinced another spotlight was about to shine on them. I sat back, my heart steady. The time was coming, though they did not know it. My silence had carried me this far, and soon it would carry me to the moment where their voices no longer mattered. The ballroom grew quieter as Graham Patel cleared his throat at the podium, his hand adjusting the microphone with the easy grace of someone who had done this 100 times before. The holiday lights strung across the chandeliers cast a warm glow over the guests, but beneath that glow I felt the weight of every eye turning forward, expectant. My dad leaned back in his chair, his smile wide, his arm slung casually across the back of Mom's seat as if the night had been designed for him. Jessica sat upright, her posture perfect, her chin tilted just enough to signal superiority. Their confidence radiated like heat, feeding off the illusion that they had already triumphed. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, the faint hum of anticipation running like current through my veins. My silence lasted the whole evening. Now it was about to pay off. Graham began speaking of resilience, of innovation, of the importance of daring to step outside expectations. The words hung in the air, deliberate and heavy. I watched my dad's eyes light up, convinced this was leading to another mention of Jessica, another chance to showcase the daughter who had always carried his favor. I saw Jessica's lips part in a smile, already preparing her gracious nod to the crowd. But Graham's voice took a turn. Tonight, we honor a remarkable young woman. She is proof that success does not come from the straight path, but from the courage to carve one's own. She has built something extraordinary. And though she once faced the doubts of others, she transformed those doubts into drive. The room shifted, conversation still. People leaned forward. I felt my pulse in my throat. The silence was no longer humiliation. It was anticipation. Jessica's smile faltered. Dad's brows drew together, his arm slipping from behind Mom's chair. Mom's lips parted as if she already knew what was about to happen. Please welcome the youngest woman on Forbes 30 Under 30. The words struck like thunder. For a heartbeat, the entire hall froze, suspended in disbelief. Then every gaze swung toward me. I rose slowly, steady, the hem of my dress brushing against my heels, the air buzzing in my ears. Applause began tentatively, a few hands clapping before the sound grew, wave after wave until the whole ballroom filled with thunderous recognition. I walked toward the podium, each step measured, the echo of my heels sharp against the polished floor. My dad's face was drained of color. Jessica's eyes widened, her hand gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Their power crumbled in the silence they had forced upon me. Now the silence belonged to them. As I reached Graham, he extended his hand. I shook at his grip, firm and encouraging. The applause swelled again. I turned to face the crowd, the faces blurred by the light. But their energy was undeniable. They were no longer laughing. They were waiting. I took a breath, the kind that comes when you realize the ground beneath you has shifted forever. I did not need to look back to know that behind me, Dad sat stiff and humiliated, Jessica rigid in her seat. Their voices had been stripped away. I remembered the nights I had sat in my small apartment, coding until my eyes blurred. I remembered the rejections, the slammed doors, the long hours when I questioned if I had chosen wrong. I remembered the night I decided to keep going anyway, when quitting would have been easier. Those nights brought me here to this stage, not luck as they always claimed. I did not lash out. I did not point fingers. I did not need to. The truth had spoken louder than anything I could have said. The ovation died down as I placed my hands lightly on the podium. My voice, when it came, was steady. I thanked the foundation, thanked those who had believed in me, and spoke of the importance of building something that mattered. I told them about Hearthlight Health, about using technology to connect caregivers with elderly patients in need, about dignity and compassion, about innovation that served humanity. My words were not grandiose. They were simple, but they were mine. I saw heads nodding, eyes shining with interest. I saw people who had dismissed me minutes earlier now leaning forward, captivated. Their perception had shifted in the span of a sentence. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Jessica, her face pale, her eyes darting toward Dad, searching for reassurance and finding none. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, his hand gripping his glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Mom stared at me, her expression unreadable, but her eyes glistened. When I finished, the applause roared again, this time rising to its feet. The ballroom stood for me. I let the sound wash over me, not as vindication, but as confirmation. I had walked through years of silence, humiliation, betrayal, and doubt, and now the world could finally see what I had built. I stepped down from the podium and returned to my seat. The applause lingered in my ears like an echo. My dad did not look at me. Jessica would not meet my eyes. Only Mom leaned slightly closer, whispering so softly I almost did not hear it. "I am proud of you." The words caught me off guard, leaving a warmth in the cold that surrounded me. For a moment, I almost let myself believe them. As the crowd buzzed with conversation, guests approached to shake my hand, to ask about my company, to offer congratulations. Their voices blurred together, yet I registered each one. Where earlier I had been the target of whispers, now I was the center of admiration. The shift was dizzying. But even as I smiled and answered their questions, a voice inside reminded me this was not the end. My dad and Jessica would not let go of their power so easily. I knew the look in their eyes, the tightening of their mouths. They were already plotting their next move. I let the thought settle, calm and unshaken. Tonight had been my moment, but tomorrow would bring new battles. For now, though, I let myself breathe, soaking in the silence that no longer belonged to them but to me. The applause was still echoing in my ears when I returned to my seat, but the warmth that filled the ballroom did not reach the faces of my dad or Jessica. Dad's jaw was locked tight, his smile fixed in a grim line as though carved from stone. Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her nails pressing crescents into the fabric of her dress. For a brief second, she looked at me, and her eyes flashed with something sharp and unmasked. It was envy, and beneath that envy was fury. Guests leaned across the table to shake my hand, to offer congratulations, to ask questions about Hearthlight Health. Their voices were polite and enthusiastic, their eyes bright with curiosity. I answered calmly, steady, letting my words and presence do the work. Dad forced a laugh as though to join in, but his voice sounded strained, brittle at the edges. Jessica took a sip of her champagne, her knuckles still white around the stem. Mom offered me a small smile, almost tentative, as if afraid to show too much approval in front of them. After a while, the crowd thinned, attention shifting toward the dessert buffet and the holiday raffle. I felt their eyes on me again, the piercing weight of Dad and Jessica, no longer softened by the distraction of applause. Jessica leaned close, her whisper sharp. "Do not think this changes anything." Her words were laced with venom, her smile never leaving her face even as she delivered them. I did not respond. I simply met her eyes for a moment, then turned back to my coffee. My silence seemed to rattle her more than an argument would have. She turned back toward Dad, who gave a short nod as if the two of them were already conspiring. The rest of the evening carried on, but for me the glow of the recognition still lingered. Strangers who earlier had looked at me with pity now approached me with genuine interest. A man asked for my card. A woman said she wanted her daughter to hear my story. I nodded, smiled, and tucked away those moments like small gifts, reminders that the years of work had meant something. But beneath the surface, tension boiled. I felt it every time Jessica's laughter rang a little too loud, every time Dad redirected a conversation back to her, each time he dismissed a compliment meant for me with a wave of his hand. He spoke of her career as if nothing else in the room mattered, stretching the details until it sounded like she was running her entire firm. Guests listened politely, but I saw their eyes flicker toward me, as though they now recognized the performance for what it was. When the final raffle prize was called and Graham thanked everyone for attending, relief crossed my dad's face. He stood quickly, pulling Jessica up with him, steering her towards a group of acquaintances. Mom and I trailed behind. As we reached the coat check, a woman stopped me to say how inspiring it was to hear about someone who had carved her own path. I thanked her sincerely. Over her shoulder, I caught Dad's expression. His lips were pressed so tightly they nearly disappeared. Jessica's nostrils flared as she adjusted her scarf. The ride home was silent. Snow had begun to fall, the flakes glowing under the Chicago streetlights as we drove north toward deep Lake Forest. Mom sat in the back seat with me, her hands folded, her eyes staring out the window. Dad kept his focus on the road, his jaw working, the silence heavier than words. Jessica fiddled with her phone, her fingers moving quickly as though sending messages to someone who would reassure her. I sat quietly, watching the city fade into the dark stretch of highway. At home, the warmth of the house did not soften the atmosphere. The Christmas tree glittered in the corner, its lights reflecting in the polished wood floor, but no one admired it. Dad hung his coat on the rack with a sharp motion. Jessica tossed hers onto a chair and Mom drifted into the kitchen. I stood by the door, feeling the chill of the night still clinging to me. Dad finally spoke, his voice low but hard. "You think a few claps make you important?" His back was to me as he poured a drink. Jessica joined him, her lips curling into a smirk. "You were lucky, Lena. That is all. Do not mistake luck for staying power." I did not answer. My silence stretched between us until he turned his face red, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. "You embarrassed this family. Do you understand that? People will think we cannot even keep our children in line." Mom's voice floated from the kitchen, thin and weary. "Robert, please." "Not tonight." But he ignored her. Jessica stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. She leaned in, her perfume heavy and sweet, and whispered so that only I could hear, "I will not let you steal this from me. Not now, not ever." Her words sent me spiraling back to that day in college when she had stolen my project, the betrayal that had cut deeper than any insult. I saw myself again in that crowded classroom, watching her take credit for my work while professors praised her. The memory twisted in my chest, but instead of breaking me, it steadied me. She had always believed she could erase me, but every betrayal had only carved me sharper. I looked at her then, letting her see nothing but calm. That calm unnerved her. She stepped back, her eyes narrowing. Dad turned away again, muttering to himself, his anger simmering. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but my mind replayed every glance, every word, every flash of envy in Jessica's eyes. They thought they could bury me under their disapproval, but tonight had shown them a crack in their power. The crowd had seen me. The host had honored me. Their narrative had faltered. I turned on my side, the soft glow of the tree lights slipping through the crack under my door. I thought about the years I had spent building in silence, every sacrifice, every lonely hour. I thought about the faces of the elderly patients Hearthlight Health had already helped, the caregivers who had thanked me with tears in their eyes. Those memories steadied me more than any applause could. Sleep came slowly, restless and heavy, but I welcomed it. Tomorrow would bring their schemes, their efforts to reclaim control. But tonight, I let myself rest in the small victory that silence had won me. The morning after the Christmas banquet, I woke to the faint hum of the furnace and the muffled sound of my dad's voice carrying down the hall. He was already on the phone, his tone sharp, insistent, the way he spoke when trying to bend someone to his will. I lay still for a moment, letting the words filter through the walls. He was recounting Jessica's achievements again, inflating them, repeating them as if recitation could turn exaggeration into fact. The same tactic he had used last night at the Drake, except now the audience was a colleague, maybe one of his business partners. His voice lowered, suddenly harder to hear, but I caught a phrase. "She thinks one night of applause makes her someone." I sat up in bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, the cold air biting against my arms. The memory of last night replayed in fragments. The hush after his insult, Jessica's sneer, the host's words, the way the entire room had turned when my name was called. The silence that had once belonged to me now sat heavy on them. yet I knew it was far from over. For people like my dad and Jessica, humiliation only bred retaliation. Downstairs, Mom moved softly through the kitchen, her slippers shuffling against the tile. The scent of coffee drifted upward. I pulled on a sweater and went down, finding her at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up, startled, as though she had not expected me to appear so early. "Morning," I said. She gave me a faint smile. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." Her eyes flickered toward the den where Dad's voice still carried. She sighed, her shoulders sinking. "He is not going to let this go." I leaned against the counter, the warmth of the mug grounding me. "I know." Jessica swept in, then her phone in hand, her hair already styled as though she had an appointment to impress someone. Her eyes fell on me and she smiled thinly. "Morning," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. "Congratulations again." "Quite a surprise, wasn't it?" Her words dripped with insincerity. I met her gaze and nodded. "Thank you." The simplicity of my response seemed to unsettle her. She pursed her lips, tapping rapidly on her phone before walking out of the room. Mom watched her go, then looked back at me with a mixture of sadness and apology. Later that afternoon, we were all expected to attend a luncheon hosted by one of Dad's associates. It was another networking event, another chance for him to polish the family's image. I considered skipping, but decided against it. Avoiding him would only feed his narrative. I would show up, I would sit through the conversations, and I would let my silence speak again. The luncheon was held at a country club in Winnetka. The dining room smelled of cedar and roasted beef, the walls lined with photographs of men in golf attire shaking hands. Guests mingled near the bar, glasses of Chardonnay in hand, laughter floating through the air. Dad moved easily among them, clapping shoulders, telling stories, his voice carrying above the hum. Jessica hovered near him, her smile practiced, her laugh perfectly timed. Mom stayed close to the edge, polite but subdued. I found myself in a small circle of guests, answering questions about Hearthlight health. Some asked politely, others with genuine curiosity. I explained the platform, how it connected caregivers with families in need, how it made aging at home more sustainable. Their faces softened, some nodded. One woman said her mother could have used such a service years ago. For a moment, the conversation felt real, untainted by my family's presence. Then Dad appeared on my shoulder. He laughed loudly, interrupting, sliding an arm around Jessica as if to redirect the spotlight. "She is the real star," he boomed. "Senior account manager at just 31. She has been carrying campaigns that bring in millions." Guests murmured politely. Jessica's smile widened, her eyes darting to mine, gleaming with victory. One man in the group turned back to me. "And what was it you studied before leaving school?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Dad cut in again. "She dropped out," he said quickly, waving his hand as though swatting away a fly. Could not handle the pressure. Wasted years drifting. Laughter rippled faintly through the group. Heat rose in my chest, but I held steady. My silence stretched until the man shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between me and Dad. I finally spoke, my voice even. "I studied computer science." The man nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Dad chuckled dismissively, already pulling Jessica toward another group. That was the rhythm of the afternoon. I would answer a question, Dad would interrupt, Jessica would embellish. They painted me as a footnote, a cautionary tale. I let them. Their desperation rang louder with every attempt. Toward the end of the luncheon, I noticed a man watching me from across the room. He was in his 50s, sharp suit, silver hair, a calm demeanor that stood out among the noisy boasting. When our eyes met, he nodded politely before walking over. Stephen Carter, he introduced himself, offering his hand. I had heard the name. Carter Hawthorne Capital, an investment firm with deep roots in Chicago. I shook his hand. Lena Whitaker. I heard Graham's introduction last night, he said, his tone measured. Congratulations. Forbes does not hand out recognition lightly. Thank you. He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Tell me about Hearthlight. I explained again, this time in more detail, describing the algorithms that matched caregivers to patient needs, the growth we had seen, the pilot programs we had launched. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking sharp questions. I answered each one with clarity. For the first time that day, I felt the ground shift in my favor. Then Dad appeared, his timing uncanny. Stephen, good to see you, Dad said loudly, extending his hand. His voice carried that familiar false warmth. You should not take her too seriously. She has had some unusual luck, that is all. Stephen's eyes flickered from Dad back to me. His face revealed nothing. Dad laughed and clapped him on the back. Jessica leaned in, her voice dripping with sugar. Yes, we all know Forbes likes to glamorize, but family knows the truth. Their words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I did not flinch. I met Stephen's eyes, calm and steady. The silence stretched until he finally smiled slightly and said, "I prefer numbers to gossip. Perhaps we can set up a time to review your data." Relief spread through me like warmth. Dad's smile faltered for just a moment. Jessica's eyes narrowed. As the luncheon ended and coats were collected, Stephen pressed his card into my hand. "Reach out," he said quietly. "I intend to learn more." On the ride home, Dad's mood was foul. He muttered about ungrateful children, about wasted opportunities, about people being easily fooled. Jessica sat stiffly beside him, her jaw clenched. Mom stared out the window, her silence heavy. I sat in the back seat, the card in my pocket, my mind steady. Their voices had dominated the day, but one voice had cut through, one voice that mattered. I knew this was only the beginning. That night, as I lay in bed, I turned the card over in my hand, tracing the embossed letters, Stephen Carter. A door had opened, small but real. I thought of Dad's face when Stephen dismissed his gossip, of Jessica's narrowed eyes. They would not stop trying to undermine me, but now I had proof that silence and truth could speak louder than their noise. Sleep came slowly, but it came with the certainty that the next chapter of this battle had already begun. Jessica's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she cut across the reception hall, her emerald dress glinting beneath the light. The chatter around us faltered. Glasses paused midair, and eyes turned to follow her, as if sensing that something about to unfold was worth watching. She came to stand in front of me, her smile stretched tight, more teeth than warmth. "You think being on Forbes makes you untouchable, Lena?" Her words dropped heavy and sharp, meant for everyone within earshot. Conversations nearby dissolved into silence. I straightened in my chair and set my glass down. Around us, guests shifted with the restless thrill of spectators at a match. My dad materialized beside Jessica, his hand gripping the back of her chair as though staking a claim. "She is right," he said, his voice carrying easily across the circle. "Success built on luck never lasts." His eyes narrowed, searching for the flinch he wanted to see. I let my gaze rest on his face, calm and steady. "Success is not luck. It is consistent." My voice was soft but clear enough to cut through the air. A few nearby guests murmured, some eyebrows raised. Others nodded slightly, as if caught off guard by the weight of the words. Jessica leaned forward, her perfume overwhelming, her tone sharp. "Consistency," she echoed with a bitter laugh. "You dropped out because you could not handle the work. Everyone knows it." Her voice rose louder now, turning our exchange into a public spectacle. The sting of her words tugged at something old inside me, pulling me back to the night in college when she stole my project. I could still see her standing in front of the class, presenting my healthcare app as her own, the pride on her face as professors applauded. I remembered sitting frozen, my chest tight, the betrayal pressing into me like a knife. When I confronted her afterward, she shrugged. "Whoever tells it first owns it." I lost a scholarship because of her theft. That betrayal had been the beginning of my leaving school, the beginning of the path she mocked me for tonight. The memory burned hot, but I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing it on my face. "Some things never change," I said quietly. Jessica's jaw tightened, her voice climbing higher. "You will always be nothing compared to me." Dad's nod came instantly, his agreement spilling like gasoline. "Exactly. She is just a dropout with a lucky break." His laughter followed, brittle and forced, filling the air with something ugly. The room fell into a hush again. Forks hovered above plates. The hum of background music seemed far away. All eyes were on us. I let the silence stretch, my smile faint but unshaken. "Funny," I said finally. "That is what you said before Forbes called my name." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward. Guests shifted, some gasped. A few clapped softly as though unable to stop themselves. Jessica's face flushed scarlet. Dad's eyes widened for just a fraction before narrowing again, rage barely masked. Behind me, I noticed a woman in a black suit, her notepad open, pen moving swiftly. She was a reporter, I realized, one of the journalists covering the event. She had caught every word. Another man nearby tapped a note into his phone, his glance flicking toward me and then toward Dad. The drama my family had created for their own satisfaction was no longer contained within our walls. It was spilling outward, being recorded, remembered. Jessica's voice cracked as she tried again. "Do not think you are special. Do not think this lasts." She jabbed her finger at me, her hand shaking. I did not rise to meet her. I held her gaze calm, controlled. Power is not in noise, I thought. It is in control. My dad's face turned red, his hand gripping his glass until the stem trembled. "Enough," he barked, his voice cracked with strain. "Sit down, Jessica." But she could not. Her fury boiled over. She slammed her napkin onto the table and stormed away, her heels striking like gunfire against the tile. Dad followed quickly, his jaw tight, his shoulders hunched, his control unraveling. Guests began to whisper in earnest, now their voices weaving through the air. Some leaned closer, curiosity alight in their eyes. Others shook their heads in disapproval. The spectacle my family had orchestrated was no longer in their favor. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, the calm center of a storm they had created. Inside, a quiet resolve rooted deeper. They would not stop. They never had. But I no longer needed to fight them with their weapons. I had my own. The reporter lingered nearby, her eyes sharp, her pen still moving. She caught my gaze for a moment, then looked away, but I knew she had everything she needed. Tomorrow the world will know. I lifted my glass again, the cool water steadying me. Around me, the noise of the party began to return, tentative at first, then louder, but the air had shifted. Their voices no longer carried the same weight. Their cruelty had turned back on them. I let the corner of my mouth curve into a quiet smile. For years, they believed silence made me small. Tonight, they learned silence could fill a room. The ballroom had emptied into a blur of coats and holiday chatter, but I still felt the burn of Jessica's words echoing in my ears. The argument between us had left a mark, not just on me, but on everyone who had heard it. The next morning, the consequences began to unfold. I woke to the vibration of my phone on the nightstand, its screen lighting up with message after message. Friends, acquaintances, even people I had not spoken to in years were texting me links. The Chicago Tribune had already published a piece. At Christmas dinner, father calls daughter a dull college dropout before 400 guests. My stomach clenched as I scrolled. The article recounted not only my dad's insult but Jessica's sneer, citing unnamed guests who had confirmed the story. I sat upright, the room spinning for a moment. Outside my window, the world was still white with last night's snow, the branches heavy, the air sharp with cold. Inside, the silence was broken only by the steady hum of the furnace. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Nora Bennett, the reporter who had been at the banquet. She had written the piece and now wanted to follow up. She asked if I would go on record. I did not answer right away. I set the phone down and pressed my hands to my face. Years of being silenced by my family had taught me that words could be dangerous, yet silence had its own power. I weighed them carefully, knowing whatever I chose now would shape what came next. Downstairs, the voices began. Dad was shouting into the phone, his voice carrying like thunder through the house. He was calling people, trying to control the story, insisting it had been taken out of context, that people were exaggerating. Jessica's voice rose too shrill, defensive. She was posting on social media, I realized, spinning the narrative her way. I could almost hear the click of her nails against her phone. Mom moved quietly between them, her voice pleading, begging them to stop before it got worse. But Dad was relentless. He slammed doors, his words slicing through the walls. She embarrassed us. She destroyed our reputation. People are laughing at us. I sat on the edge of my bed, breathing slowly, steadying myself. The truth was out now. They had wanted an audience for my humiliation, and they had gotten one. But the audience did not belong to them anymore. It belonged to the world, and the world was watching. By noon, the phone calls began. Colleagues, investors, friends of the family. Some offered sympathy, others asked pointed questions. I answered a few. My silence was deliberate, my control of the narrative stronger in stillness than in noise. In the afternoon, I walked downtown, my coat pulled tight against the wind. The city was alive with holiday shoppers, the air filled with carols and the smell of roasted chestnuts. Yet everywhere I turned, I felt the invisible eyes, the whispers that seemed to follow. Was she the one from the article? Is she the daughter? I ducked into a coffee shop, grateful for the warmth. As I waited for my drink, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Nora Bennett. She smiled, her notebook in hand. She said she had hoped to find me. She spoke with calm, her voice steady, not sensational like the others. She told me she had more than enough witnesses to confirm what had happened, that she wanted to give me space to share my side if I wished. I studied her for a moment. Her eyes were clear, her posture open, not predatory. She was not there to trap me. She was there to listen. Still, I shook my head. For now, silence. She nodded as if she understood. Sometimes silence tells its own story, she said, closing her notebook. I left with my coffee, her words settling inside me. That evening, the storm grew. Social media churned with clips and quotes from guests. Some defended my dad, saying he had been joking. Others said they had never seen anything so cruel. The hashtags multiplied, my name trending alongside phrases like toxic family and holiday humiliation. At dinner, the house was a battlefield. Dad slammed his fork against the plate, his face red, his voice rising. "This is your fault, Lena. You humiliated me. You humiliated all of us." Jessica's eyes blazed. "You will ruin our name. You will drag us down with you." I set my fork down and met their eyes. I did not speak. The silence stretched thick and suffocating until Mom finally broke it with a soft plea. Enough, please. But there was no enough for them. Their anger had no bottom. Later that night, I sat by the window, the glow of the Christmas lights reflecting in the glass. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the lamplight. I thought of every year I had been told to sit quietly, to not make waves, to let Jessica shine. Now the truth was shining whether they wanted it or not. My phone buzzed again. It was Stephen Carter. I heard about the article, he said. Do not worry. Numbers speak louder than gossip. His voice was calm, firm, a lifeline in the storm. I thanked him, my throat tight with gratitude. When I hung up, I realized how different this felt. For the first time, the weight of my dad's words was not mine to carry. The world had heard them, and the world was judging him, not me. The next morning, another article appeared, quoting guests who described the scene in vivid detail. Dad's denials looked weak against their testimonies. Jessica's posts seemed hollow, her words defensive. The cracks in their image widened. At breakfast, Dad's anger turned desperate. He pointed at me with his trembling fork. Fix this. Tell them it was a joke. Tell them they misunderstood. Jessica chimed in. You have to say something. You cannot just sit there. I looked at them both. My coffee warm between my hands, my voice steady in my silence. I would not protect them this time. Mom looked at me across the table, her eyes weary, a question lingering there. I gave her the smallest shake of my head. Afterward, I walked outside, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The snow crunched beneath my boots. Each step steadied me. Their voices were louder than ever, but they no longer reached me the same way. My silence had become something more than protection. It had become defiance, power, truth. I knew this was not the end. If anything, it was the beginning. The world had only just started to see who they really were. The morning after the Tribune piece, the storm had only grown louder. My phone lit up before dawn, its glow cutting through the shadows of my bedroom like lightning. Friends sent screenshots of headlines. Old classmates tagged me on social media. Strangers I had never met filled my inbox with words of encouragement and pity. At Christmas dinner, a father called his daughter, a dull college dropout, had spread from Chicago Tribune to national outlets. The story had taken on a life of its own. My humiliation replayed in thousands of words I had never written. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone heavy in my hand. The blinds were still drawn, but light leaked in at the edges, gray and cold. My heart beat fast, though I had not moved. The truth was out now, no longer locked inside the family walls. People debated it openly, dissected every detail. They speculated about Jessica's jealousy, about my dad's arrogance about me. For once, their voices were not louder than mine. My silence had carried across state lines without me saying a word. Downstairs, the house was a furnace of anger. Dad's voice boomed through the halls, shouting into the phone. He spoke in frantic tones, calling old business partners, demanding retractions, threatening lawsuits. Jessica's shrill voice followed, her heels clacking against the tile as she ranted about how people had twisted her words. I caught fragments, misunderstood, taken out of context. Family should stick together. I pulled on a sweater and went down to the kitchen. Mom was there at the counter, her face pale, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up as I entered, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. They will not stop, she whispered. They think if they shout loud enough, the story will change. I poured myself coffee, the steam curling into the air. It was almost laughable, except nothing about it was funny. For years, they had owned the narrative, twisting every family memory to suit themselves. Now the world had seen a glimpse of the truth, and they were clawing to take it back. Jessica swept in her phone, clutched in her hand, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She thrust the screen toward me. Look at this, she hissed. Do you see what they are saying about me? She scrolled through comments filled with accusations of cruelty, envy, betrayal. They think I am a monster. You need to fix this. Her words jolted me. Fix this. As if I had written those articles, as if I had begged Dad to humiliate me. I stared at her, my silence pressing against her panic. She snapped her phone shut, her face twisting. You are ruining us. Dad stormed in, then his tie half nodded, his face flushed. He jabbed a finger at me. You are going to call that reporter and tell her it was a joke. You will tell them you misunderstood. That is how this ends. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. My voice, when it came, was steady. I am not calling anyone. The silence that followed was volcanic. Dad's mouth opened and closed before he slammed his fist on the counter. You are destroying this family. I did not flinch. For once, I saw the fear behind his rage. The day stretched on, with news cycles spinning faster than they could keep up. Talk shows debated whether family drama should be news. Bloggers wrote about toxic parents. Hashtags trended. I stayed off social media, but the tide carried me regardless. In the afternoon, I received a call from Stephen Carter. His voice was calm, cutting through the noise. "Do not let them rattle you," he said. "The more they scramble, the more they expose themselves. People respect composure." I thanked him, my chest loosening just slightly. His faith was like a rope in the flood. That evening, the air in the house thickened with tension. Mom set dinner on the table, but no one touched it. Dad paced, muttering, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls. Jessica scrolled furiously, typing replies, deleting them, typing again. Finally, she looked up, her face pale. "They want me fired." She pushed her phone across the table. Comments flooded her company's social media page, calling for accountability. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered the way she had smiled when she told me I would never be anything, the way she had stolen my work years ago. Choices had consequences. Dad exploded, then turning on me with renewed fury. "This is your doing. You brought this curse on us." His words rang through the dining room, shaking the air. Mom begged him to stop, but he would not. I set down my fork, meeting his eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply held his gaze until the room went silent. He could not stand the quiet. He turned away, his shoulders hunched, his power slipping. Later, I stepped outside, the cold biting my cheeks, the snow crunching under my boots. The neighborhood was still, houses glowing with Christmas lights, wreaths on doors, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the air. It should have been peaceful, yet my mind raced. Their anger was a storm that showed no sign of passing. My phone buzzed again. It was Nora Bennett, the reporter. She had uncovered more. Guests who had overheard every word had gone on record. She wanted to know if I would respond. I stood under the lamplight, breath clouding in the cold, and considered. Silence had carried me this far. My voice could wait. I typed a short reply. "Not now," she responded with one line. "Sometimes silence is the loudest truth." I put the phone away and walked back toward the house, the snow crunching beneath me. Inside, I knew Dad and Jessica were still raging, still plotting, still trying to bury me under their noise. But outside in the wider world, their voices no longer held the power they once had. The truth had slipped free, and it was not going back. For the first time in years, I felt something like freedom. The house felt like a cage by the time the weekend ended. Dad's anger had not cooled. It had only hardened into something darker. Jessica stayed close to him, her voice sharpening his edges, feeding his belief that I was the enemy. Mom moved around us like a ghost, trying to keep peace where there was none. The headlines had not slowed. If anything, the story had grown, with television anchors now repeating the words he had shouted across that ballroom: "Dull college dropout, no future." Each time I heard it, I remembered the silence that followed, how it had broken him more than me. On Monday morning, I overheard them plotting. I was walking past Dad's office when their voices carried through the half-open door. They were on a conference call with someone, a contact in the media or maybe a lawyer, and Jessica was pressing for a strategy. "We need to discredit her," Jessica said. "If she speaks at that conference, it will destroy us." Dad's reply was sharp. "We will leak something, make people question her credibility. They believe what they read, not what they see." The words sank into me like stones. They were planning to bury me, not with insults this time, but with lies. I leaned against the wall for a moment, my palms cold. I knew them well enough to understand that when they felt cornered, they struck harder. I left the house before they noticed I had been listening. The cold air outside was like a blade against my face, but it steadied me. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked to my car, each step an anchor against the storm rising inside. By afternoon, the first whispers appeared online. Anonymous comments suggesting Hearthlight was built on stolen code, rumors that I had exaggerated partnerships, questions about whether Forbes had been misled. They spread quickly, multiplying across forums and feeds. I sat at my desk and read them, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. I recognized the fingerprints of my family in every line. The words carried their bitterness, their desperation. Stephen Carter called me that evening. His voice was firm, almost steady enough to erase the weight pressing on my chest. "Do not answer them," he said. "Do not feed the fire. You have the numbers, the contracts, the truth. That is stronger than their noise." I thanked him, my throat tight. His faith gave me something to hold on to. After we hung up, I sat in the dim light of my apartment, turning his words over. Silence again. It had carried me through humiliation. Now it would have to carry me through lies. 2 days later, Dad summoned me to the dining room. Jessica sat beside him, her eyes sharp, her arms crossed. Mom lingered at the doorway, twisting her hands in her apron. Dad's voice was calm at first, too calm. "If you love this family, you will withdraw from that conference. You will not go on stage." His eyes bored into me, his tone leaving no room for argument. I met his gaze without flinching. "I am going. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "Do not steal my spotlight again. You ruined Christmas. Do not ruin this too." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that had unnerved her before. "Silence is exactly what brought me here," I said. "And it is what will finish this story." For a moment, the room froze. Dad's face darkened, his hands slamming against the table. Mom gasped softly. Jessica rose to her feet, her voice rising to a shriek. "You will never win!" I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the floor. My heart beat steady, not racing, not faltering. I stood and walked toward the door, the heat of their fury at my back. I did not turn around. Outside, the night was bitterly cold. The air stung my lungs as I drew in deep breaths, letting them steady me. Snowflakes swirled in the streetlight, delicate and fleeting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Stephen again. "The conference wants you as keynote speaker. Tomorrow, the stage is yours." I stood there, the message glowing on my screen, the world suddenly sharp and clear. Tomorrow I will stand before hundreds, maybe thousands. Tomorrow their lies would not matter. Tomorrow my silence would echo louder than their screams. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked down the street, the snow crunching beneath my steps. The houses were lit with Christmas trees and wreaths, warm lights glowing in the windows. Behind me in the house I had left, their voices rose again, muffled but relentless. Ahead, the city stretched wide, waiting. I kept walking, each step carrying me further from their noise and closer to the stage where my story would finally be mine alone. The lights inside McCormick Place glowed like a constellation, each bulb casting a golden shimmer across the vast hall. Rows of chairs stretched into the distance, filled with faces expectant, curious, waiting. My heels tapped steadily against the polished floor as I followed the stagehand to the wings. The sound echoed inside me, a rhythm steadier than my pulse. Beyond the curtain, the host's voice carried warm and commanding. "Tonight, we welcome an extraordinary young entrepreneur, the youngest woman on Forbes 30 Under 30. Please join me in applauding Lena Whitaker." Applause surged like a wave. For one suspended second, I stood still, the curtain brushing against my arm, the roar surrounding me. Then I stepped forward. The lights met me in a rush so bright they blurred the edges of the crowd. I lifted my chin and walked to the podium, each step a promise kept to myself. The applause lingered, then softened. Silence spread wide and heavy, the kind of silence I had learned to live inside. I rested my hands on the podium, the wood cool under my palms, and looked out at the audience. Beyond the lights, I saw shapes and shadows, rows of people who had come to hear, to witness. I thought of all the times silence had been used against me, twisted into shame. Now it was my stage. I spoke slowly, letting my voice settle into the space. I told them about dropping out of Northwestern, about long nights in a small apartment with nothing but a laptop and a dream. I told them about Hearthlight Health, about the idea that dignity for the elderly was not negotiable, that technology could bridge the gaps families struggled to cross. My words were not rehearsed to perfection. They were lived, each one carrying weight. Faces softened, heads nodded, people leaned forward. The energy shifted like the air had grown denser with belief. I talked about failure, about rejections that had nearly broken me, about betrayal that had once left me doubting my worth. I did not name Jessica, I did not name Dad, but I let the truth live between my words. Applause came in bursts, quiet at first, then stronger. I saw movement in the corner of the hall. Dad and Jessica had come. They sat stiffly, their faces pale in the glow of the lights. For once, they could not interrupt, could not talk louder. Their silence was their prison. I continued speaking of consistency, of small steps carried out every day, of how persistence becomes success. I said that sometimes the people closest to us cannot see who we are becoming, but that does not erase who we are. My voice did not waver. The words carried from my chest like truth finally unburdened. When I finished, I paused. The hall went still, breathless. Then applause rose, thunderous, rolling across the room. People stood clapping, cheering. A standing ovation. The sound pressed against me, warm, immense. I let it wash over me, not as revenge, but as release. As I stepped away from the podium, a journalist raised her hand and called out, "How do you respond to what your family said at Christmas dinner?" The room hushed again. I stopped, turned slightly back, and let a small smile touch my lips. "Sometimes silence is the best answer," I said, "and success is the loudest voice." The applause exploded again. Cameras flashed. I walked off the stage, the weight of years falling from my shoulders with each step. Backstage, Stephen Carter was waiting. He shook my hand, his smile firm. "Numbers," he said, "will always beat gossip." His words steadied me even more than the applause had. Behind him, I glimpsed Nora Bennett, notebook in hand, her eyes meeting mine with quiet respect. She did not need more quotes. She had her story already. When I left the hall, the night air hit my face, cool and crisp. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in my hair. I looked up at the sky, the city lights dimming the stars but not erasing them. I thought of my dad's voice that night in the ballroom, Jessica's sneer, my mom's silence. I thought of every year I had been dismissed, every time my silence had been mistaken for surrender. I was not here to destroy them, I was here to outgrow them. Revenge, I realized, was not shouting louder. It was standing taller. Later outside McCormick Place, Dad and Jessica found me. Their faces were pale, their voices low, uncertain for the first time in years. Dad's eyes shifted, searching. "We are proud of you," he muttered. Jessica echoed it, her tone brittle. The words were hollow, offered too late. I nodded politely, nothing more. My silence again became my shield. I turned away, stepping toward the waiting car that would take me home. Their voices faded behind me, small, powerless. On the ride back, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and let the city lights blur. I thought of the women who might hear my story. Women told they were too late, too small, too insignificant. I wanted them to know silence can be strength. That dignity once claimed cannot be stolen again. When I reached my apartment, I set down my bag and stood by the window, watching snow fall on the streets below. My reflection stared back at me, eyes steady, mouth curved into the faintest smile. I had walked through fire, and the fire had not consumed me. It had forged me. And now, to you who have walked with me through this story, I want to ask, have you ever been underestimated, dismissed? Told you would never amount to anything, only to prove them wrong in your own time? I would love to hear your story in the comments. If this journey resonated with you, if you believe silence and dignity are stronger than cruelty and noise, let me know. And if you want more stories of family drama, betrayal, justice, and the quiet power of revenge, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter. I stood at the window for a long time, the city quiet beneath the snow. My story was no longer theirs to tell. It was mine, and it had only just begun.